I'm an award-winning artist. That is if you count kindergarten drawing contests. And I think we should. I remember the competition amongst the other 5-year-olds to be pretty intense. But I did it. I won. In fact, I still remember the drawing. So I made this tree, and I put a little bird on one of the branches, and had musical notes floating in the air, perfect nature scene, really groundbreaking stuff. Seriously, though, everyone loved the drawing. But more importantly, and this is the more important part, of course, I still remember the feeling. I remember the feeling of getting the blue ribbon. So I grew up in a small town in western North Dakota, and I was born with spina bifida. So I was had somewhat of an awkward childhood. I know that's hard to imagine, given that very assertive-looking young man there. But I knew I was good at drawing. Drawing became therapeutic for me, and it also gave me confidence, so much so that I decided to dedicate my life to art. About 17 years ago, I became a receptionist at an art museum in Fargo. And fast forward to today, and I'm now the director and CEO of that very museum, which continues to introduce me to the impact that arts organizations can have on individuals and communities. I think art museums today are primarily known for having things. We have challenging modern art, we have intricate sculptures, we have beautiful paintings of flowers and rare artifacts, but what can art museums really do for us? And that's what I'd like to talk about more today. The late Stephen Weil, for many years the deputy director of the Hirshhorn Museum of the Smithsonian, once wrote that art museums in the 21st century will go from being about something to being for somebody. I think what he predicted was basically our current century purpose lies more in what we do than in what we have. And I take that a step further. I think that arts organizations and museums are not only for people, I think we can actually be human-centered problem solvers. So, I would like to remove from your mind the arts as this very beautiful decorative flower. For the sake of this talk, replace it with this. One of the handiest tools in your toolbox. Now, in the US, and likely in many places around the world, I think people are more and more existing in binary silos. I think people are identifying as black or white or urban or rural or liberal or conservative. All of this, I believe, leads to a decrease in empathy and cultural understanding. According to a recent study, in fact, people who identify as white have a friendship circle that is over 90% white. And people who identify as black have a similar statistic that can be applied to them as well. This is the US today, as exemplified by Chicago and St. Louis, with each dot representing a person of a different racial identity according to the narrow and somewhat antiquated categories of the US Census. But I still think there's some interesting things to glean from these graphics. There are very few integrated neighborhoods in the US, much less integrated cities or towns. I'd like to talk about empathy for a minute. Broadly speaking, empathy is the ability to genuinely relate to someone else's thoughts, experiences, actions, and feelings. When you carefully experience a good work of art, whether it's a painting or film or theater or dance, you are often asked to make a human connection to the person or the people who created it, to try and understand their inspiration, try and understand their intentions and their actions and their thoughts and feelings. By doing this, if you're able to make these connections through artwork, you are practicing empathy. So it's no surprise that studies are beginning to find a direct relationship between the two. Now, what happens when there's a decrease in empathy? One of the things that happens is an increase in the objectification of people. In Ferguson, Missouri, for example, we now know that police officers have a long history of targeting people of color to devastating effect. Conversely, seeing police as an oppressive system does not reflect the humanity of the officers and strips them of the dignity of the many that serve their communities with honor. And this damaged relationship is not a Ferguson-only problem. Interestingly enough, part of the solution may actually lie at the Perez Art Museum, Miami, where a program exists called Art Detectives, which connects middle school students with police officers and art educators and provides them with a meaningful shared experience in the schools and at the museum. But why do this through art? As one of the program managers says, because art is truth-seeking. Prompted by this program, one of the participants, who's now in middle school, shared a story of when she was 8 years old. And she was riding in the back seat with her mother. Her mother was driving, obviously. She was pulled over by the police. Seemingly routine traffic stop. The police then actually pulled a gun on her mother, and she felt herself threatened as well. This experience made her very, I think reasonably so, afraid of police officers. And now she's in this program, and they're having this shared experience as equals. And so she sees the humanity of the officers, and vice versa. The police officers are having a shared experience with community members that they are to protect and to serve. I believe that programs like this can be a part of community police training. It's pretty cool stuff. The ability of art museums to help solve problems does not end at the ones that are human-made. We've been talking about chronic illness today. Again, art museums like ours here and others around the country are actively developing programs reinforced by science that shows that the environment that a person is in has a positive impact on their ability to cope or their recovery, which makes perfect sense, of course, but museums have been late to the game in this. But there's now emerging programs around the country, and one of them is at the Honolulu Museum of Art, where a very important PTSD program exists called Warrior Eyes on Art. The goals of the program are threefold. It is to help it's to use art and positivity to heal. It's to get the soldiers used to civilian life, and it's to give them the tools necessary to cope with the trauma that they've experienced. So many soldiers experience a dramatic shift throughout this program, which I think is pretty great. And I want to talk about this painting for a minute. I believe this to be a pretty important painting. You might think as an art museum director it's about the product, but for me, I think this is important because of the creative process. So at the beginning of one of the sessions, the soldier who made this painting painted a disembodied head. And on the bottom, he added some fire, and on the top was storm clouds. Basically, the essence of turmoil was being described throughout the creative process. It changed throughout the day, prompted by the instructor with a very simple question: how can we make this painting more hopeful? So he thought about it, and he added the crown, and then some simple brush strokes, added some raised hands. Essentially going from despair to optimism as he created, which I think is pretty great. Now we saw Chicago and St. Louis. Here's North Dakota. There are dots in there, I swear. Along with its therapeutic abilities, art is an effective connector of people. It connects people to one another, and it connects individuals to themselves. It is also a central element to elevating regional economies. However, our binary existence reveals an arts access gap, where people with more resources, who often live in cities, too often have more access to the arts than people who live in rural communities or rural parts of the world and underserved neighborhoods. I think we can do better. I think we can build more inclusive, more creative, more empathetic, more vibrant, more entrepreneurial communities that will lead us into the future, and I think we can do it through the arts. Recently, thanks to support from members and donors, our museums in Fargo-Moorhead have taken the bold step to make our galleries general admission free, doing our part as a region in helping close this arts access gap. Well, I could go on from here, but you get, I think, the idea. If I can leave you with one thing, I hope it is this: the arts are not a luxury, but instead are useful, and they exist for everyone. They are also exactly what the world needs more of right now.